What's up everyone, MK Tom Brady here. So in this video, I'm going to tell the real story, the real history of the downfall of NRS, of Mortal Kombat, and of its scene. You know, over the last couple of weeks, a lot of content creators have been coming out talking about this. And as part of their videos, they speculate as to like, why is this happening and where's the blame here? Some people fault Warner Brothers, others NRS, others the community. Some people even go as far as to blame Tekken 8 and say, well, Tekken 8 has killed Mortal Kombat. When the truth is, Mortal Kombat has killed themselves. NRS has killed themselves. All Tekken 8 did was shine a magnifying glass. And really, the years and years and years of mistakes that had gone unnoticed and not talked about and that they've been allowed to get away with have all hit them at the same time. And we'll get into that near the end of the video. But I want to start out by letting you guys know a few key things. One of them is, if you're, a younger and you just started to compete in Mortal Kombat over the last few years, you don't remember a time when the MK was not part of the tournament FGC. You probably think it was always there. Quite the opposite. So your modern tournament scene that you enjoy today, where you go to the venue and it's this whole production, that was born at the end of 1999 to the beginning of 2000. See, before that time, consoles in your home were not powerful enough to have arcade perfect ports. And here's what I mean by that. Back then, games would come out in the arcade first for about a year. And maybe a little longer in some instances. And when they came to the console, the console just wasn't powerful enough to run the game the way the arcade was. And too many changes had to happen, too many things had to been done to even have the game run on the console. That was until 99 to 2000, where the Sega Dreamcast, also known in the arcade as Naomi Hardware, and the PlayStation 2, also known in the arcade as Board 246, made their way into your living rooms. See, now, games like, Tekken 4 and, Soul Calibur 2 could run perfectly on the arcade. Tekken Tag 1, also before Tekken 4. Marvel 2 was not arcade perfect. It had some differences. It was a little faster, I think, a few other ones. But it was good enough. And Marvel 2 is the game that really gave birth. It is the mother of the modern FGC. Because Marvel 2 was so big that, it kind of allowed your tournament organizer to rent a conference room at a hotel, knowing that enough people would show up for them to make their money back, at least in venue fee, and then they would pay an entry fee, which also gave you enough money to pay out to the winners. And this was a big deal because, before this, you had to hold tournaments in arcades. With one, you want to pack 500 people in a small arcade, not very comfortable. And two, arcades were arcade cabinets. Well, gamers play more than just on arcades. They sometimes play on a controller, and some of them have different controllers. Some people like different types of sticks, and at an arcade, the sticks, one arcade to the next, sticks were different. Some arcades kept up their sticks, others didn't, so sometimes you had to play a whole tournament on really crappy controls. It just wasn't ideal. And the modern era allowed people to play on whatever stick they want, on whatever pad they want. It just opened it up as far as more people could join, more people could play. And obviously people could practice at home with their friends. They wouldn't need to go to arcades. Once you bought the game, you owned the game, you wouldn't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars playing the game to level up. You bought the game once, and that was your purchase. And it really kind of changed the way the tournament scene went. And we saw games like, Marvel and Tekken and Soul Calibur. And, the Evo series was, once known as Battle by the Bay, where it was a Capcom-only event, mainly powered by Marvel. Marvel drew in so many people, though, They then began to, use other Capcom games to piggyback off of Marvel, Third Strike, things of that nature. Alpha 3, they flew in some of the top Japanese players, and really the Capcom scene began to explode, and then it moved from Battle by the Bay to Evolution, where then they began to hold the 3D games, the 2D games, Virtua Fighter, Tekken, Soul Calibur, Marvel 2, Street Fighter. And this is how your modern tournament scene was born. Now, I mentioned a lot of games there, but notice what I didn't mention was Mortal Kombat. That's because Mortal Kombat was done. The last Mortal Kombat game came out in the late 90s. It was Mortal Kombat 4, and that is seen as the black sheep of the Mortal Kombat arcade series. And besides psychos like myself, I just loved MK and loved to compete, who traveled around for the game to compete in tournament around the country. A lot of people really didn't receive the game well, and UMK3 is really kind of the game that is looked at as that game from that era. So Mortal Kombat didn't have a presence in this new tournament scene. In fact, outside of a very niche scene in the Northeast kept alive by Shock, Mortal Kombat really didn't have tournaments bigger than 25, 30 people. In fact, a 30-man tournament would be considered a massive barn burner for Mortal Kombat because there was no good console port of the game. You had to play it on like MAME or on an arcade cabinet, and people just aren't going to walk around from tournament to tournament with an arcade cabinet on their back. So in the end, Mortal Kombat really had no place in the modern tournament scene. So you're looking at 99 all the way to 2011. I mean, MK did have, the 3D games. MK Deadly Alliance only had a few tournaments. Some of them were, over 100 people, but only a handful. And it piggybacked off of tournaments that were just holding Soul Calibur 2 and Tekken 4. And after maybe 7-8 months, you never saw another tournament for Deadly Alliance ever again. The game had infinites and other kind of like garbage in it. You had to make rules and police these things. The 3D MKs had tons of infinites, death combos, death traps, whole bunch of stuff. You needed to walk around with a rule book and a referee to hold a tournament match for that game, so none was ever held. And it was just kind of like an online community, an online only scene, doing like fun things like clan battles and whatever else you do. And, it was just not in the modern scene. So as like kids who were 4 years old when UMK3 was out, got older and joined the FGC, there were games like Street Fighter, MVC, CVS, SVC, TVC, all these games were out. And, all these versus games and, Tekken and Soul Calibur, they were all there. Virtua Fighter, VF4, VF5, and there's just no Mortal Kombat. So you're going to pick one of these games, or if not a multitude of these games, that you get into, that you play with friends. MK just really isn't one of them. And then something happened. At the very end of MKDC, we find that Midway was bought by Warner Brothers, who they pretty much dissolved everything outside of the Mortal Kombat team, and they rebranded it NetherRealm Studios, now owned by WB Games. And Mortal Kombat 9 was coming out. Now, this was at first memed heavily by the FGC, because all they knew were, what is it going to be? Infinites and death combos and scrubby 50-50s, and they were kind of memeing MK. But something crazy happened. MK9, before ever being released or any type of beta being played, was announced that it would be in EVO 2011. This is huge. This is MK being an EVO title meant it was going to be in all the tournaments leading up to EVO, as it is an EVO game. So this assured that Mortal Kombat would have a place in the modern tournament scene. Now, NRS, I feel like, made a very conscious effort. You can tell they cared. Because in MK9, they tried to make sure there were none of these scrubby 50-50s. They tried to really tone that kind of stuff down. They tried to modernize their game with a more modern meter system, put supers in the game to take all 3 bars. You see things like this in Street Fighter. They tried to modernize and standardize their game. to kind of match like what is the expected standard for a tournament game. They even brought in guest testers. I was one of them. I was there for a week to test the game. This is the first time any MK ever had something like this. So they definitely wanted to try to get this game right. Now, of course, the game had issues that were patched several times, had several patches in the first 6 months, and then no patches after that. But the game was well received by its community. What's funny is that NRS, as silent as they are now, they were quite talkative back then. They would address issues constantly. They were in streams talking to people. They were at events talking to people. They were on Twitter and on forums talking to people. The, mum's the word approach that they have now, they didn't have then. And to my knowledge, they were owned by WB Games then too. So for some reason, this bureaucratic machine that that people talk about, we certainly didn't have any of those issues there. They seem to have no objection to NRS, communicating. And, look, the game had its issues, and but it was fun. And the reason why it was so successful and so fun is because it has something for everyone. The story mode was revolutionary. Every game from that point forward needed to try to mimic MK9 story mode to some degree. The challenge tower was pretty fun. I never play things like this. I played through all 300 floors to get the Melina Flesh Push outfits. I know a lot of people did this as well. The game also gave you freedom of expression. There was something for everyone. If you were someone that liked to zone, there were many zoning characters, and they all did this differently. If you liked to be aggressive, there were many rushdown characters, and they all did it different from the other. If you like to be lame, there were lame out characters and keep away characters that didn't play the same. There were trapping characters, and one person's trap was not the same as another. The characters themselves were just more diverse. NRS, while they obviously didn't get this right, there was obviously a tier list, and the very top of the tier list is very far ahead of the very bottom of the tier list. But they, outside of a handful of characters, they tried to distribute the power well. While all power wasn't equal, there was power, and even a character that was considered like number 20 on the tier list was powerful enough to consistently make top 8, despite how powerful the top characters were. Now, obviously, this was not the case down to like the bottom 7, 6, 7, 8, 9 characters, but to say 22 of 30 characters were powerful, that's good for where we are now with NetherRealm. And, one of the challenges you would have is you have to build a scene. Just dropping a game into the tournament scene doesn't guarantee success. You don't have an established scene. You need to build it. And this started on the East Coast because, like, on the Northeast, there was already an established small Mortal Kombat scene, which blew up with MK9. And we had massive, seems like there was a tournament every week in the Northeast for Mortal Kombat. But people loved the game. So soon it went from just the Northeast dominating to every region having their own local scene. You see, what happens is when you love a game, and there's this type of love fest between community, game, and developer, good things are bound to happen. It is the formula for a massive success. See Tekken 8 now. And people loved their game, and they got their friends into it. So what happens? You and a couple of friends are playing. You meet someone who you guys don't necessarily know, but you all love the same game. And you say, hey, me and a few friends, we play every Wednesday and Saturday. Why don't you come join us? Local scenes were born. Now, besides just New York and New Jersey, there was the Northeast, and there was Atlanta, Florida, Texas, Chicago, Ohio, Arizona, Las Vegas, California. Local, and these scenes were just becoming just as good or better than the Northeast scene. So we had a very healthy, representation. The EU scene, with the ketchup, mustard, Foxy Grandpa, things like this is how these guys became known to us. Used for glue, people, over in Australia, Tony T, Megabits, these guys, Gilbags, the Sub-Zero Goat, my brother across the water over there, they were all playing. We knew who all these guys were. We saw their matches. We saw their footage. These local scenes were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger across, multiple regions. And the cool thing about the game, which really gave it life, is, I saw Mike Hollow mention this in a video, and, the ability to express yourself goes a long way. He brought up how in Tekken, Nee went to Pakistan to learn the Pakistani style because it is not the same as the Korean style. People would learn the Korean style. They would learn the EU style. That feeling of no two character looks the same. You're able to invent and create. I created this way to play. This is my custom way to play. I created it. I play this way. Other people don't. That was present in MK9 and even to some extent MKX. But since we're on MK9, that, not just how diverse the characters were, but that freedom of expression, which is so important from person to person to keep them interested, was there. So did the game have a bunch of faults? Tons of faults. But because of the communication that NRS had with us, we knew the limitations of the PS3 technology. You couldn't just patch games in there. We knew the limitations of the games being coded. So at the end of the day, there was kind of this, small, it was not small, but it was a pretty big love fest between the community, developer, game, etc. The game was picked up in MLG, which was huge for the game. To have major corporate sponsorship there were so many fighting games. Street Fighter wasn't included in MLG. But Mortal Kombat was. The Mortal Kombat scene, for being a rebirth and its first time being introduced into the modern tournament era, it surprisingly was very, very, very big. As far as it's just under the Capcom umbrella, it was over Namco. So here we have, Sega doing Virtua Fighter, Namco doing Tekken and Soul Calibur. They were all kind of jockeying for who's under the Capcom umbrella. And they have been there for years. Mortal Kombat just gets released. It's first time in the competitive FGC light. And it's immediately under the Capcom umbrella. There's Capcom and there's NRS. And then there's everyone else. That is remarkable when you're trying to build a scene from scratch, that there was that much love and the scene grew that quick and that big. Now, the most important thing to realize here is this is a 2-year window that I'm talking about, or a year and a half really before Injustice came out. A year and a half. That's nothing compared to how long these other scenes have been around. You still need to continue to grow the Mortal Kombat scene. I think because the name Mortal Kombat gave such instant success, and by luck, the game happened to be very, very fun, enjoyable, give you freedom from expression, a lot of things that are very, very, very important. NRS community was a little spoiled where they just thought, hey, yeah, it's the scene that builds itself, the game that builds its own scene. No. Things take work. To continue to build your scene takes, work on the part of the developers to keep the games going well and the community to keep growing the scene. And I guess the MK community didn't realize this. So at first things were going great. It was at MK9 was at EVO 2011, EVO 2012. Now Injustice came out, but MK9 was still at EVO 2013 along with Injustice. And MK9 to this day is the only NRS game to have 3 EVO appearances as a main game, not a side game. And its third year, it wasn't some garbage side game. It was not just a main game. It was a big deal. People played. They took it serious. Winning and losing mattered. People wanted this to matter. So, and it was hype to watch. It was one of the best tournaments ever for Mortal Kombat 9. And all while Injustice was out. So for anyone that says Warner Brothers did it by demanding NRS make another game, well, for one, MK9 and Injustice were coexisting side by side just fine. They were at the same Evo, and both games were extremely successful. And Mortal Kombat 9 was growing and growing and growing. And now we have an Injustice scene to grow alongside it. So you would think everything would be going well. Not necessarily. Now, like I said, a lot of people will fault NetherRealm or Warner Brothers for Injustice and say Injustice was the problem, started to kill it because it separated things, but that's not true. You see, lots of developers have two games active at the same time. Street Fighter and MVC, Tekken and Soul Calibur. Now, like let's say Namco. Soul Calibur may kind of be the little brother of Tekken, so it's never usually active for as long as Tekken, but it's active for a pretty long time. And then a new Soul Calibur comes out, and once the old one has died off, well, Tekken is usually always alive, but Soul Calibur will die off after a few years. And then they'll make another one. But these communities coexist. Some Tekken players play Tekken and Soul Calibur. Some Soul Calibur players move on to Tekken, play Soul Calibur and Tekken. Some just start on one and go to the other. Some play them both at the same time. Some only play one or the other. But either way, you have a scene that is being built, a community that's being built. Same with Capcom. Well, the NRS community didn't get that memo, and this is where I'm going to put some on the community here. Something weird happened, where after that third Evo, pretty much everybody abandoned MK9 and went to Injustice. Now that's fine, but there were still people that didn't like Injustice and they wanted to stay playing MK9. And this is how you continue to build the scene. And let the Mortal Kombat scene continue to grow and continue to live until the next MK. This is what happens with every fighting game that has, multiple titles by the developer. But the NRS community did something really weird. They would label people who stayed with MK9 and didn't go to Injustice 1 as losers who couldn't cut it in the current game. People living in the past who just can't adapt or adjust to the modern times. It never dawned on them that you need to continue to grow the Mortal Kombat scene, not kill it for the next 2 years, and then hopefully it'll still be there, in full force when the next MK comes out. You need to grow the Injustice scene while simultaneously continuing to grow the Mortal Kombat scene. And by not doing so, here's what happened. Well, you had a lot of the MK guys that didn't like Injustice. They didn't move on to Injustice. And because there were no more tournaments being held for Mortal Kombat, because nobody wanted to try to keep it alive, because nobody wants to be labeled as all these terrible things, they just kind of waited and just waited for the next game. So MK has MK9 is not being played much, if at all. And then we have Injustice. Well, what happens in MKX? The same thing. Injustice. Hey, if you're still playing Injustice 2, you can't move on. Injustice 1, if you're still playing Injustice 1, you can't move on. You're a loser. You can't adapt. You can't adjust. Blah, blah, blah. All this other nonsense. And then the Injustice scene begins to die off. So happens is you got MK9 players don't like Injustice. There's no way to continue growing MK. You have Injustice players who came in only for Injustice, right? So if you're an MK guy and Injustice is out, there's no tournaments to go to. And if you're an Injustice, you don't like Injustice. And then when MKX comes out, if you're an Injustice player, you came in with Injustice and you say, well, I don't really much like MK. I don't like MKX. Well, you don't have Injustice to compete in anymore. You're just going to have to wait till the next Injustice game. It basically started a trend of building a scene for a year and a half to almost 2 years, then killing it for the next 2 years, then trying to rebuild it. You see, success came very easy at first to the NRS community because of the name of Mortal Kombat and how NRS got very, very lucky with making their first title in years. And they believed it would be easy. Like, it would just happen for them. Like, hey, people will just want to come and want to play. And they didn't realize that it takes work. and the instant success with MLG. The NRS scene enjoyed instant success in ways that scenes would kill for. And it just, I guess it kind of spoiled them. This is why you see people in MK1 say, it's Warner Brothers' fault. If they'd be putting more money up, our scene would still be there. They enjoyed instant success, and they're always waiting for someone else to do the work for them because they've never had to do anything for themselves. They've always just let the one thing die off and let the name carry it rather than the community working to keep it progressing forward. So this is really, the community never realized that you can't just end a game and then rebuild it. Now on to NRS. So NRS, from restarting a game is hard enough because the community, obviously ends one for the next and then ends the next for the other. But then when you don't have any legacy at all, when MK9 players come back, they say, well, I don't like this MKX. I was hoping you guys would kind of build off this. No, didn't happen. And if you're someone that got into Injustice 1 and went back and played MK9 with some friends who might have, been in the NRS scene, and you're like, hey, I want to play MK9. I wanted to get into MKX when it comes out. Well, MKX comes out, not only is it not Injustice, it's not MK9. So you're like, well, I'll just sit this one out. So you have some old returning players, but a lot of new ones as you just remade the game again. And I mean, they created so what you're going to notice a trend here is what NRS does is it doesn't carry anything over from one game to the next, but it will try to make a change to address what they consider to be an issue in the previous game. The only problem is it's not the previous game. So when you try to correct an issue that was there, that may no longer be there because it's not the same game, you just end up creating a problem. So that's kind of what NRS did. They're trying to fix something that they themselves know won't even be there because they're remaking a game from scratch. It just shows complete incompetence, and they just don't know what they're doing. So MKX comes out, and they have this variation system, which was supposed to prevent some of the counterpicking that was in MK9. Now, every single game has counterpicking, and there's no way around it. And just some characters are going to match up better against other characters. That is the way of the world. And the community was a little younger at that time, so I guess they hadn't realized that. But NRS, as the developer, they should know this. Like, hey, counterpicking is part of fighting games. There's really no way to prevent this. No, they went with the variation system, which then split characters into threes. In some cases, it worked okay, and maybe a handful, but in others, if one character lost a match in one variation, they lost a match in all three variations. So it didn't really help for the most part. It didn't even really fix what they were trying to fix. Also, they were still counterpicking because no matter what you do, they will always be counterpicking in fighting games. And splitting characters into three different versions of themselves it still was kind of gimmicky. However, the game was there was still that freedom of expression there, and the game was still fun enough to where, like, MKX's launch was probably the most successful launch in Mortal Kombat history. The Fatal 8, there was a buzz in the Fatal 8 that I have not felt in a long time. Mortal Kombat X launched, it was huge. I mean, I was getting 2,000 to 3,000 viewers, myself and Rio. I remember, when we came back from with an early copy of it from, what was it? Fatal 8. We had 5,000 to 6,000 people. And the game was hyped. The game was fun. The tournaments were hyped. The tournaments were fun. People were watching the game. Anybody that was streaming the game that understood how to play it was drawing thousands of viewers. Thousands. So it wasn't just the case now where unless you're Sonic Fox or Ninja Killer, and then on a smaller scale, Foxy and K&M, 2 to 4 people when the game comes out. Anyone that could help you learn the game was getting thousands of viewers. There was just so much interest in the game. The game was so hyped to watch. People wanted to get into it. So NRS, their mistakes, they got very lucky here. There are a ton of mistakes in MKX, from block infinites that were in the game for longer than they should be, to characters that had, no, just aspects of a game that had no business in a competitive environment. Launchers that were plus 27 on block. A launcher that's plus 27. What in a fighting game even needs to be plus 27? Like, something could literally be like plus 15 and still jail you into just about everything. Why that absurd number of all things? Only God himself will know. NRS made so many mistakes in that game. But in restarting your game's legacy, as far as how the game plays, you are restarting your competitive scene. So not only did the community restart its competitive scene each and every game just on its mistakes, it was then compounded by NRS to you couldn't even bring the old players back because most of them didn't even like the changes. So it was just, NRS didn't realize you can't build a scene. You can't build a community. When you restart your game, you restart its scene. And they restarted it every single time. And just, but the games sold. And people would constantly make excuses. I mean, there was, in MKX, they made it a 50-50 game. It was about mix. So you had overheads that launched. The purpose of these overheads that launched were to hit somebody who was crouching because they thought you were going to do a low. Well, you launch them, and if they're a female crouching character, they only go half as high. And some of your juggles weren't even possible at all. Can you imagine that in Tekken? That if you go to launch, say you go ahead and go to launch Asuka, and your whole combo drops because instead of getting a full launch, she only goes as high as your knee? Do you think the Tekken community would justify that and say, it's fine? No. They would literally, that would be unacceptable. However, because it's NRS, if you brought these things up, you were, quote, complaining about the game. You see, another mistake NRS made, besides using no legacy, never perfecting their game. You see, NRS, they clearly realized the window they had to develop their game. And they always chose to redo, remake the wheel. But making a good idea is not necessarily something that grows on trees. When you have a great idea that works, that sells, you build on it, you perfect it, you add to it. You don't scrap it and say, what's the next new set of ideas? And by the way, I did mention no legacy, and I want to give another example to NRS's mistakes. They would, as far as correcting problems from one game to the next, MKX was considered very oppressive. So when you got knocked down, it was very hard to get up. So they made a completely new system for MK11 that was designed to make sure what happened to you in MKX doesn't happen to you anymore. However, MK11 was not MKX, so because it was bland and watered down, in many cases the person on the ground ended up having more options than the person who was standing, and the person on the ground, a lot of times for you trying to pressure, would get up and combo you. It was just as dumb as the breakaway mechanic itself. And it was designed to help you with the problem that was in MKX, only you don't have the problem that was in MKX because, well, it's not MKX. You don't carry any legacy over, so you make more problems than you solve. NRS is just filled with incompetence and blunders. Also, another example of things they were able to get away with. CEO, one of the biggest tournaments, they had a character, Tanya. There was 6 Tanyas in top 8. In fact, the top 16 was plus 27 Launcher, Kung Lao, Tanya, and Bone Saber, Shinnok, and 1 Cassie. 4 characters in the whole top 16, and 1 character dominated the majority of that. And the tournament wasn't even hyped for who was winning or losing. People were just counting the amount of teleports Tanya was doing. Ed Boon's on his phone. He has the phone held up loud so other people that can hear, like, hey, this is what people are doing. And of course, they addressed the problem after that. Now, something similar happened with Leroy, and it was made a big deal. This happened with NRS, swept under the rug. Another mistake, allowed to get away with it. NRS has pretty much gotten away with every mistake they've ever done, and another reason is because They have conditioned the community to allow them to do so. Going back to MK9, if there was something called the input bug that I discovered with some friends, in which we found out for sure that you would do a direction and a button, and sometimes the direction just wouldn't come out. And sometimes you would be holding a direction like down, and while you would just automatically stand up sometimes while holding down, it would just for a second cease to exist. It would just, the input would just cease to be recognized. And when I would bring it up, NRS was quick. They had to have known it was in the game, but they were quick to say it didn't exist. Can you imagine a major problem like that? And the studio denies it and says it doesn't exist. And all those talking about it are excuse makers and crybabies and hating on the game. This is where my reputation of being a quote unquote excuse maker and blaming the game started and came from. NetherRealm Studios, in which anyone who remembers MK9 can testify to this. I was the one that brought attention to it, and NRS was basically, don't believe him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a crybaby. He's an excuse maker, and he's blaming the game. It doesn't exist. And of course, later we found that it does exist, and we found out how to duplicate it. So, game-breaking bug. The studio denies it, and then would throw shade at anyone who would talk about it. This is what they've done through the years. Another example, I'll give you one more. I'm a Sub-Zero player. I have a very famous video what people love to reference now called "The Ice Clone is not functioning properly." If you ask anyone today, they will tell you it was a video of me raging about the Ice Clone and complaining for buffs. The clone is just, it needs to be better, and I'm just crying about the game. This is actually a video about, so before NRS did Combat Cast, they would do smaller little productions, and they would go over their changes. One of the changes was to the Ice Clone, but they said, hey, we allow the EX Clone to do this now. You can use it in this situation now, and it does this now. It can be a bait. It keeps you safe in this situation, so on and so forth. So I went to use this in tournament the same way them on their own broadcast told me to use it, and it didn't come out, and I was hit and punished. Well, I went home and labbed it and found out it was bugged, that it actually cannot come out. 80% of the time it doesn't come out. Only 20% of the time it does. It was bugged, and they said it was some type of breathing hitbox issue. More excuses. And I made a video detailing it, saying this needs to be fixed. This is kind of like, it's not functioning properly. And it was made into this thing where me just asking for it to work the way they themselves said on video was asking for buffs. Yes, and there were other people who simply asked for something to behave that way it was told to them that it would behave on video, on production by NRS. That was just asking for something to function properly. A mid to hit mid, an overhead to hit overhead, a launcher to actually do a full launch, moves to work properly were considered quote unquote crying and asking for buffs. And this is how the studio conditioned their audience to let them get away with murder so that they can continue to pick your pocket without having to change how they actually do things and have them do it the right way. So this was definitely a conscious thing. And anyone who tried to hold NRS accountable was immediately labeled as this hater, negative person who's killing the scene and all these things. It was just impossible to hold them accountable for anything at all. And, when MK11 came out, people still tried to remember like MK11 was so much better than MK1. MK11 was terrible. MK11 launched with 2 variations. Now in the beta, there was a custom variation system. So we thought, hey, this could be cool. Game comes out, there are no custom variations. Now they did mention it the week before the game's launch. So obviously pre-orders went out. They promoted this custom system, and then all of a sudden, a week before, 2 weeks, well, it's actually going to be 2 variations to start. There's not going to be a custom. So the game was launched with only 2 variations, not a custom variation system. It had a ranked mode, no Combat League. It had a ranked mode and no crossplay. It had a story mode, which to each his own. I thought it was, again, started to go along the timeline stuff. They started that MCU route where they're just revising timelines and multiple versions of multiple use of multiple characters. And so you had the story mode, you had challenge towers, and you had Shang Tsung's Island. Or Shang Tsung's Island was pretty cool. I enjoyed it. I did it. I unlocked everything. I thought it was fun. Kind of that, you had that sense of exploration in the game. You kind of had a mini game within the actual combat game. It was really, really cool. I thought they did enough to kind of appease some of the casuals. However, when it comes to the gameplay, it was extremely bland. For one, Combat League, which was quote-unquote coming soon, it was coming soon forever, delayed multiple times. Crossplay, delayed multiple times. It was then eventually in beta, and to this day, it still says in beta if you load up the game. It was never completed. The characters, 2 variations. It was very, very bland. When the game came out, most characters, only one of your 2 variations were even usable. The game was very bland, very watered down. Everything about the game was known in the first 2 weeks, and it never changed through the life of the game. Even when they added a variation 3, you added a little bit of spark because you had like upgraded Jackie, and she obviously didn't play like regular Jackie. But within a week, that was figured out, and that never changed either. In fact, the biggest content NRS ever gave you in Mortal Kombat 11 was extremely watered down and bland. The biggest content they gave you was called a customized variation system, the last patch of the game. See, although, however, before these final patches, Ed Boon was antagonizing his community constantly. Ed Boon would constantly tease possible updates and things like that, only to never deliver, and then make tweets about why does everybody feel so entitled. Entitled? Ed, we want you to fix the game. The game is in a terrible state, but he calls us entitled. Okay, good job, Ed Boon. And then, of course, even content creators started making videos like, yeah, I think we are a bit of entitled. Look how great the game is. Look how much content we have. The game is complete garbage, and everybody recognizes it for being garbage now. But at that point, they were saying it's great. It's the best MK ever. It's the most fun ever. Where the community's being so entitled and expecting one thing or another. Ed Boon is antagonizing the community. Maximilian did a video on what he expects them to announce at E3 because Ed Boon did a tweet a week before E3 or maybe a couple days before E3. Hey, here's a poll. What game do you want to see as remake? Shaolin Monks, MK9, etc. So Maximilian did a video saying, I expected something. Nothing happened at all. And then Ed Boon has the nerve to say, why did everybody think we were going to name a title? What's going on? The man is clueless as the studio is, as the people that make the game are at this point. So the community is being poked while waiting for something. And then, of course, we get Aftermath, and then we get the final version of the game, the Ultimate Edition, whatever it's called. And their big thing, if you ask anybody, the biggest change in Mortal Kombat 11, they'll say it was custom variation. That is the biggest content addition. But custom variations wasn't new content. It was delayed content. Custom variations were there the very first day of the game. And if all they did was unlock the ability to use custom variations in a competitive mode of play. They didn't give you new content. They unlocked delayed content. And the reality is there was still too many limitations. Some moves were banned. Other moves had restrictions where you couldn't equip them if you had certain moves equipped. Other moves had moves that would conflict. They had the same command, so you couldn't use that move with this move because they both have the same commands. They never went back in and changed them. You had some of the worst moves in the game have 2 slots to equip, and some of the best moves in the game have 1. So many moves were completely useless because they were not redone or their point slots were not reallocated to match along the line of the strength of the move. Attacks that had the same inputs were not changed so that you could equip both of those moves. It was a very restrictive, quote-unquote, custom variation, which wasn't even new content anyway. It was delayed content. And for some reason, the community was still in denial. Still like, no, it's good. It's more alive than ever. And even at this point, if you spoke out and tried to hold NRS responsible, the community would, no, it's fine. It's whatever. Because NRS had conditioned them. And they would try to throw money at the game for their first Pro Series. And then they would try to, do things like They would have the online pro series, and it was all about you could win some money. You can not love the game, you could win some money. You can win. They tried to use money as a way to cover that up. Well, obviously in MK1 there is no money. The money is not what it is, and you actually have to like the game to play it. In fact, people hate it so much that these pro series, these offline that are giving $10,000, NRS has yet to have a single 300-man offline tournament, and these are for a $10,000 prize pool to be split between the top 8. So $10,000 does not even motivate people to get up to try to play the game. And that just kind of shows you the state of the community right now. There are so many mistakes from NRS and how they've done things and how they've developed things and how they've continuously watered down their game and made simple products. And you don't think that they know that, to start from scratch every single time, in a 2-year window is just not possible? Of course they do, but they just don't care. And the community ate it up. In fact, the community actually even blamed the casuals for why their tournament scene isn't progressing the way it should. Not NRS, not themselves. No, they blame the casuals and Warner Brothers for not putting in more money. And the reason why the casuals get blamed is because what you've always heard over the years is Mortal Kombat is the casuals game. The reason why it can't grow is it just has too many casuals. Other games don't have this. And their justification is, well, it sells the most. So clearly it has the most casuals. Well, now Tekken 8 sells the most. But I promise you, Tekken 8 will not have a problem putting 7,000 people at EVO. A number Mortal Kombat will never see, not even close. And they have all the casuals now. They are the new king of sales. But that doesn't change. Their community is still growing in ways the NRS scene never did. So we see it clearly wasn't because of the casuals, because now that Tekken 8 has all the casuals, their tournaments are huge. And their scene will continue to grow and explode. So we see that the selling of the game does not equate to the most casuals, so the scene can't grow. That's not true. And people are noticing this now, and they're going, well, wait a minute. Now that Tekken's the king of sales, why don't they have this problem that we had? And, really the one thing Tekken 8 has done, it has given the MK community the red pill, like Neo in the Matrix, right? The wool that NRS has pulled over its community's eyes and all the shills that went along with it to try to influence people to think the same way. The community has woke up. You see, Street Fighter was never a game that NRS community was going to get into. NRS games are built more so like Tekken. They both have a juggle system. Street Fighter does not. MK's frame data is also very reminiscent of Tekken. 8 and 7, 8, 10 frame jabs. Tekken's all 10 frame now, but at one time they used to have 8 frame jabbers. The juggle system, the frame data, all that stuff is very reminiscent of a 3D game, not a 2D game. So if Tekken obviously ever created a GG product, it was bound to really pull a lot of the NRS audience away. You see games like Tekken 6 and Tekken Tag 2, it just, Harada was on the hot seat. It was not doing very well. And Tekken had not exploded like it was now. And the reason why I bring up Harada being on the hot seat is because that is why Tekken changed. Tekken changed because when the bottom line changes, things change. All people care about, the way businesses see that there's a problem is, as Mike Hollow said, people vote with their wallets. And when you vote with your wallet that you don't like the product, the company sees this, right? You can say you don't like the product, but if your wallet says you do, they say, okay, they seem to love it. So when he calls for people to, hey, you know what? Let MK1 feel this pain. He's 100% correct. Because what changed with Tekken? Harada was on the hot seat. Because the game wasn't selling like it should in Tekken Tag 2. Things had to change. And they did change. And that is why we have the Tekken 8 that we have today. See, Tekken 8 didn't kill Mortal Kombat. But without Tekken 8, the NRS community would not have a game that they have gone to instead. And when playing this game, they realize everything that they have been told was a lie by NRS, by the shills whose bottom line is aligned with NRS's bottom line, and they realize this is not acceptable. In fact, it has never been acceptable. And they're angry, not just about MK1. They're angry about MK1, about MK11. They're angry about a lot of things over the years. And they're like, it will never again, this will never again be acceptable. If not for Tekken 8, people would be saying MK1 is the greatest game ever. When MK1 launched, like people will say, Tom, you said the same thing. It was the best. In the beta, I said it had the potential to be the best MK ever because it was a beta and it looked like they might be on the right track. When the game launched, however, within the first week, I knew the game was complete garbage and I made videos about it being garbage every single day from the first week of the game on. And had it not been for Tekken 8, people would still be saying the same thing. Like a week, 2 weeks, a month into the game, people were like, it's the best MK ever. It's the most fun ever. Anyone who doesn't see this is a hater. They'll never be happy. NRS has given you everything you want. What kind of an idiot could see this game and actually say these things? I mean, like, wow. You have to be a true underdog to really, no pun intended, to really kind of look at things like this, right? And say these types of things. And if it wasn't for Tekken 8, NRS would continue to get away with the same garbage they have for years. Is there a way to save MK1? No. Maybe I could do a video on what they could do to salvage it, but they can't save it. They might as well literally just start working on the next MK right now and just say, hey, guess what? Next year, here's MK13. Don't even call it MK2. Please don't do that. But one thing is for certain. Their mistakes will never be tolerated again. And they will never be able to pull the wool over the community's eyes again, nor will they ever be able to kind of brainwash people into thinking things that used to be acceptable have ever been acceptable or will ever be accepted again. But let me know what you guys think. Hopefully things get turned around in the next game. Who knows? As always, stay tuned for more content.